Welcome everyone to Rooster and Hen Resources. We are with our lovely Education Officer, Rebecca Wu, and I am the other hostess, Grace Wong. And I am today here in DC, just having gone through a conference, and Rebecca is still back in Chicago, and we have an event we're going to share about that Rebecca just did recently with how many women were in that event? 20.
20.
That's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
what did you call the event and what was the purpose of the event?
It was part of a women's conference that a church hosted. So the church is Park Community Church, a local church in the city, and their theme was recreate. So, sort of, how do you recreate your self-image? How do you recreate yourself to, I think, fulfill your potential, fulfill your gifts and talents, and to, I think, follow your calling? And so they had different, I think, programming, and there was this breakout section that they had different guests come in. And of the three, I was one of them. So they asked me to do like a self-portrait workshop, which I've done before. But I wanted to design it so that it is sort of attuned and akin to what they want the the day to be about. So then what we called it was the creator's canvas, a self-portrait journey. So sometimes like when we think about self-portrait, right? It's like there's the eyes, there's the nose, there's or maybe it's like a profile, or maybe it's like Picasso looking. So I think all 20 ladies who signed up for this thought that we'll be drawing like themselves with mirrors. So they're like sleeves rolled up, about to like draw something really realistic. But in the end, it wasn't. It was all abstract. It was very, very reflective. And the point of it is to dispel negative self talk and reaffirm our worth and value intrinsically. So from beginning to end, it was more like a semi guided journey.
What were some of the questions that you asked the women, yeah, to help process?
Well, so you know I'm a
Mm-hmm.
teacher and you're a teacher, like a kid teacher,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we always have to start out with some sort of icebreaker, or else we can't start, almost like our bodies can't function without an icebreaker. So we played a little game and activity to introduce ourselves, right? So we're used to like, hi, my name is Rebecca. This is what I do. La 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 la. So glad to be here. So I don't want to do that because they already probably done that before. So I said, hey, let's introduce ourselves with our first name. And because I'm a kid teacher, I love alliteration. So like Rebecca starts with R. So you think of an adjective that starts with R, right? So Grace. And then it starts with a G. So you think of an adjective that describes yourself. For example, Rebecca. Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm reliable. R for reliable. And we might be accustomed to doing that, but then I wanted to kind of challenge them a bit to share an adjective that they don't often share about themselves. So perhaps it can feel a little negative. It can feel a little maybe embarrassing or maybe even shameful or something they probably would rather hide from people as opposed to share or show off. And that wouldn't be how you would introduce yourself. For example, I said, I'm reliable and also resistant. So, resistant to change. Change is hard for me. And so I said, who wants to go next? And there was like silence. Silence for about like a good, like, 40 seconds, which if you think about it, that was just 5, right? So it feels long when you're, like, together in a group, and I had them stand in a line, like, facing each other with a masking tape between them to prepare for the next exercise. So after about 40 seconds, we had a brave soul, and some of them couldn't think of alliteration words, but that's okay. So, for example, someone said that they're energetic, E for energetic, but also they fear being too extra, E for extra. We had fun and funny, and also fearful. We had inquisitive, insecure. We had adaptable, and then a very long pause to think of which word, and then critical. So that's how we sort of opened to create one, I think, a safe space to be vulnerable, and then also to push yourself to almost admit that that's how you see yourself, or or almost be worried or afraid that that's how people might perceive you, or these are traits in you that you're not proud of. So that's one way we started. So we started kind of heavy.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, especially it's probably the thing that I know as women we crave to talk about and be seen and known by often, but it's also the most intimidating thing because we feel so deeply and we're fairly self-aware in regards to our emotions or know that we're not being self-aware, which is really funny. It's like,
Where
yeah, my friends can tell me when they're ignoring their emotions, but at least they know that they're ignoring their emotions or burying it. And I think that's really funny.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think to be in a room full of women that um, may or may not know one another is very fascinating. And I also say that having just come from a conference where there was a women's leadership offshoot, and it was a room full of women in ministry and predominantly of Asian American or Asian descent, largely Asian American. We had one African American woman, and we had one mixed race male who wanted to witness the room and how we talked about women leadership. But the exercise
Mhm.
that we were invited to partake in was is very similar to what is like very interactive. There were different labels and identity markers and big post-it like posters around the room. One being like faith communities, one being work identity, one being American, ethnic American, like Asian American, Japanese American, another being multicultural, another being Asian American, and I think the last was gender. And according to different questions, we gravitated towards different identifiers, and the women were able to admit that for themselves they didn't know where they belonged. And so sometimes some of
Mhm.
them were caught in the middle and talked about code switching. But it's really interesting because the facilitator was saying that she was offering an opportunity for people to tell their story without having to use words if they didn't feel comfortable using words, which is why we did that.
So there were walls of
Mhm.
identifier.
Which is like really helpful for American women who are, again, wanting to obviously by the end of the workshop, you could see that all the women felt grateful that they had connected with a new woman who had maybe a similar journey or not, and can
Mhm, mhm,
identify similar patterns or sentiments. But at the same time, it's like they didn't necessarily have to speak aloud your personal experience. And then the
mhm,
ones that did were very surprising because the nuances and the migration patterns of each individual are just vastly different from the other
mhm.
in the contexts. So um, that's really fascinating that calling to you're calling them to. There was one that was really confusing for me was how do you think people perceive you? And I was the only one at that identity marker, and it was American. And they were like, oh, that's fascinating. Why? Like an American and not necessarily ethnic American at all, just American. And I was like, it's because I'm in a lot of global international spaces too, and or monocultural spaces. And I can be considered way more American than the people within that space. So even
Right.
if I'm Chinese American, it's like, oh, Grace is louder than the rest of us. So um she's more American than I am, or whatever, whatever not. It's
Right.
really
It
interesting.
all depends also, like, in the context, right? Like, how your identity may or may not shift, and then depending on the audience, how you would purposely shift so that your identity can either conform
Right.
or confront or, like, maybe even stand out, right? So, the part that's my dog.
All right, Bubbles.
Hi, Bubbles. When I was like asking the ladies about, because it's a self portrait, right? We talked about how do we see ourselves and has anyone ever drawn a self
Mhm.
portrait? So I feel like it's almost like a visual, illustrative way to kind of relate to like what you did at the conference. Like, how do you identify? So I've asked who's ever done a self-portrait. You have like a few hands raised. Or did it look like you? And they said, yeah, it looked like me. And then I asked the question of, has anyone done a portrait of someone else? A few more hands raised. Did it look like them? And then they said, yeah, fairly look like them. So I think that gives you like almost like a glimpse into the assumption that portraits and self-portraits have to be realistic, right? They have to look realistic, like how you draw it or how you paint it. And the value judgment is if it does, then it's good, right? If it did look like them, then that's a good thing. And then I posed the question of, well, when you look at a self-portrait or a portrait of another person, whether you drew it or not, what's missing from it, right? A lot of people have their portraits done, and I kind of related it to like our profile pic. So if you have to put up a profile picture of yourself for anything, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, whether it's any other, even Google, your Gmail, whatever it is, you might actually have a different profile pic based on the platform. Maybe, maybe not. And what picture would you choose? Right? And does that reflect all of you? Or does it only reflect the part of you you want that audience to see, or that platform's audience to see?
Mhm.
Or does it reflect the best parts of you, like your best features, the lighting's great, the complexion's like clear, like is that what you want to show? And so I was just asking, but yet you bring all those profile pics together, does it really represent your whole self? Does it really represent everything? And so I think the ladies were responding like, what's missing is like your history. What's missing is where you came from,
Mhm.
who you came from. What's missing is your background. And then I go, usually modern times, self portraits or even profile pics, they're not, they're either smiling or pleasant, right? For the majority. I think in older times, you were quite stern
Mhm.
when you took pictures. It was a very serious occasion, outside of passport pictures, that is. But are we always that pleasant? Like, if I have my smile pic, if I was just to tell you, hey, Grace, ready? We're going to take a picture. Are you ready? Okay, three. Get yourself ready, Grace. Are you ready? Three, two, one. Is that the profile you want? So, and when we can kind of know when someone's not ready because they're not smiling, they're not looking at the camera. But symbolically, maybe that doesn't represent me at the moment. right? What about the ugly times? What about the angry times? What about the frustrated times? What about the worried times? What about all those different things? Your entire journey cannot be represented or even composed within one piece, one photograph, one painting, not even a collage. So then that was like the backdrop and the foundation from which we started the self-portrait journey, which I brought one to show you, not theirs because they got to keep theirs, but I brought an example to show you. So, but on it are different words, right? So this is kind of how we started here. But before this, we had to go here. So it was, I think, very different for a lot of people, but also really, I think, therapeutic. So before we got to this point, right, you can see all the colors mixing and all the edges filled in, drawing and stuff. Behind it, we kind of drew with like rocks. So the point is to pick like different colored pencils and just move the rock around the paper. And then as they were talking, I would, share about, okay, pick a pencil that represents your childhood. Whatever color, you pick it. And then as they're using the pencil to move the rock around, you're going to get all these paths as you try to keep the rock on the paper or the stone. And then I would talk about, okay, let's think about when you were a kid. Like, were you shy or were you precocious? Were those two positive words or negative words? What did you love to do? What didn't you love to do? What were some memories that you have that are like core memories? What are some losses that you've had? So like all these things journeying from childhood to teenager to like womanhood. There's so many twists and turns and there's no set destination because we're all still a work in progress. So by the end, we would also, use Post-its, mirrors, talk about which perceptions, whether it's self-imposed or others imposed, are more sticky. Like Post-it notes are sticky notes, and why they're so sticky. Why do we let them stick so strongly, right? And which ones fall off pretty easily? Which ones can we squash pretty easily? Especially negative ones. Which ones can we say, no, that's not true, or that's a lie, that's a misconception, that's not really me? Or positive ones that can squash easily, where we lose our confidence and we have a lot of self-doubt. So it was a very reflective journey, and I don't think that that's what the ladies expected. And I think after the fact, we had displayed all of our artworks on different easels and kind of looked at them together. And some of them were saying, like, it's completely not what I expected, but also fun, different, and had me really look within and think about who I am. So when you like overlay these watercolors on top of your like rock paths, I was saying, well, that's the love you have. In the faith context, that's God's love you have that washes over you. That's the forgiveness, that's the grace, whether it's from God, whether it's from your people, the ones that love you, whether it's from yourself. What is washing over you and all your different paths in life to give you that color, to give you those different seasons of mixing, those different chapters of your life. And when we outline them with the black, look at those little edges, right? Those little edges matter. They're the intersection between different colors when they have mixed. What do they mean to you? Those little details matter a lot. You can fill in the little holes, you can fill in the little voids. Like all of this is really part of your journey. And then what words do you want to include in here that you would want to put in your self-portrait, knowing that it's a work in progress? You can go home and continue this. You can add more colors, you can add more lines, you could add more words. So I think the whole process was very like symbolic, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And I think it was quite like being seen and heard by others is often what we say and what we might want, but being seen and heard by yourself, I think we rarely do, but I think we need to do more often because it's important. It's important where and what that foundation is when we go forth in the world, especially when we feel like with different audiences, we do have a different persona. We have a different set of rules. We might code switch. And what does that mean? And if you have to, or if you feel you have to wear masks at different moments, when you take off that mask, do you know who you are? And do you know that you're valuable and where your worth comes from? So it was a it was a busy hour and a half, and it was a colorful hour and a half. We had a lot of fun. We drew portraits of each other without looking at the paper. There's just so many little activities that I can't wait to share. And usually I share that on Instagram in a reel reveal. And you get to see some of the ladies, what they created, what they wrote, some of our games. So it was a fun time.
Did the rock represent anything?
No, the rock didn't represent anything. It is an exercise that is often done in art therapy, though I'm not an art therapist, but art doesn't have to be art therapy to be therapeutic, right? So I borrowed that, I guess, exercise to help us create paths that aren't necessarily straight and to create paths that were a little looser. And I think what ends up happening, if I were to say draw your journey or like draw lines of your journey, we would have a specific destination when we draw. Whether we start at the bottom of the paper, we think then the destination is to go up because we have a start and a finish, right? But the whole point is there was really none. Because as we go through our childhood, we really don't know while we're in it what the next milestone really is. We're trying to figure it out as we go. And we're still trying to figure out, even in our teenagehood, in our young womanhood, in our older womanhood. And then if there is motherhood, if there is parenthood, right? There's all these different areas where we're just getting to the next step. And to be okay with that, I think to be able to draw those sort of paths using that rock was helpful to loosen ourselves up and to open our minds to something unassumed. So not like a set outcome. So when I first started, I explained to them that this is process art. So you're enjoying the creative process. You're being engaged in the process of making art and whatever comes out of it versus a very specific end result. So when I was doing the examples, I only showed them when I had to show like a technique using wet paper with watercolor. So what that meant. And then I would do it with them. So there's nothing to copy and there's no right or wrong. And I had lots of different questions from the ladies, like, why did we use all these different colors? Do they mean something? And I was like, does it mean something to you? That's like the go-to teacher response, right? Well, what do you think? What do you think about that? Do those colors mean something to you? And when people look at like their artwork like this, they start to create meaning. They start to look at like when this orange and blue kind of mix together and the green and the yellow, they see the contrast, they see the gradations, and they create meaning because they were almost just primed to reflect and think about their journeys thus far. I had one woman talk about, wow, when I was like doing like the rock paths, all these different flashbacks came into my mind. And she was in, I think, her 50s. So she's like, all these like different childhood memories that I didn't actively remember. And then I did the teenage rock and these certain like events like came up. And then she said that it helped her realize and remember how far she's come. And I think when we're kind of stuck in that static self-portrait mode or static like profile pic. We captured ourselves in a certain moment in time. Maybe it's our best moment, or maybe it's our best smile, which is why we would put it as a profile pic. But whatever it is, that's just a static still moment, right? Doesn't capture all
Yeah,
these
it's
other
also
things.
not like 3D.
Yep. And back then, like back when I was growing up, there's only film camera. So when you took a picture, it was because it was so important. You wanted to remember it, right? But there's lots of other pictures that we've taken in our minds and memories that didn't make it on film, didn't make it on the iPhone, didn't make it in the reel, didn't make it on a profile pic, that are extremely important and meaningful and pivotal in who we are and who we became and in our identity. So there was.
What other responses did you hear from the women, if they were brave enough to contribute their story, their testimony, their feedback?
We had this, our layout was like groups of 4 in a circle table, so I can lay out all the materials to each person, right? We need a space. And then the other part of the layout was just empty room, where we would come to a masking tape line. So imagine the masking tape line down the middle, and then they're like flanking the line facing each other. And I would like say things like, come to the line, sort of like your nonverbal identifiers that you talked about, like without actually vulnerably having to share their life story. They could have done it, but there's a way for you to share something without needing to say anything at all. And then you see who came to the line. So for example, I would say, come to the line if you've ever felt you weren't pretty enough. And then I think there were some surprises, because everybody came to the line. And we had ladies like in a range of seasons, from like you said, college graduates to, those in their mid-50s, right? And then everybody feels that way. And then I was like, stay on the line if you still feel that way today. And that's hard to admit. It's hard to admit, especially, when, I put on some makeup to be on this podcast, especially when almost women are expected to look put together a lot of times when they show themselves in public, and when they're not, and they're letting themselves go, or whatever connotations you have, right? And while like every other day I'm barefaced and I like that about me, this is the look I wanted. Like, I want to create a more professional look. But why is this a more professional look, right? As opposed to without the makeup. And that, we had questions like, come to the line if you've ever felt strong. Stay on the line if you feel strong about who you are. And then step back if you're kind of not sure. And come to the line if you ever felt insecure about what someone said about you. Come to the line if you feel like whatever second adjective you just gave isn't something people will love you for. So it was like a silent sharing. So there was that, and then at certain moments I would have them look at who's at the line. Like, look at who's with you. Like, we're not alone. Sometimes those feelings of self-doubt, negative self-talk, create almost this vacuum. To feel like it's just us. We're the most horrible. How could I have done that? Or how could it be this way? Or why am I not better? Or that wasn't that great, actually. When we're like kind of silencing ourselves into isolated vacuum, negative self-talk gets louder and louder and louder, right? And those comments get stickier and stickier and stickier. Unless we have a community, right? We have a support system helping us, reminding us, seeing us, hearing us. And also, if we have a practice of really looking within, seeing ourselves, hearing ourselves, what's happening here, like a check-in, right? I think the other time we had some sharing was when I had them pair up and make a self-portrait with both hands. So that's called like bilateral drawing. You use both of your hands. Your dominant will almost always lead your non-dominant hand when you're drawing like this. So they have to look at their person. So Grace, if you're my partner, I'll be staring at your face for a whole minute and a half. And my paper is on the table. And I have 2 pencils in my hand. And I have to draw your face. And the whole time, you are telling me a story. And I am listening. I am listening as I'm drawing. And you can even see I'm right-handed and this is my non-dominant hand, right? So if I were to like make a circle, this is going to be a more perfect
Yeah.
circle. Here I can do it kind of. But if we had to like write, the left hand struggles a bit, right? But if I do it together, then the dominant hand will always assist and the left hand for me will always follow. So we're like drawing like symmetrically what we see. And then while you're telling your story, the prompts were talk about the hopes and dreams you had in your life. Talk about a moment where you felt so proud of yourself. Talk about a time when you felt so much joy. Share about what gives you light, what helps you feel free. Share about a moment where you were so like comfortable in your own skin. And so as you share and someone's like looking at you, it can either create this sense of like, wow, like this person is really attentive, right? I've never had that where the other person's not trying to like jump in or talk about themselves, right? So I think in that instance, some of the ladies were sharing that even though they know it's not like being written down, it's not being recorded, the story they share about themselves, they weren't sure if it was right. They weren't sure if it was a good enough story to share with this neighbor who's drawing them. And then it could feel very self-conscious because they're drawing them. And the drawer was saying they felt really self-conscious because they didn't want to draw them poorly. And they were nervous because they're obviously not looking at the paper or they're really bad at drawing, whatever the idea was. And then another pair was saying they actually knew each other and said, because I knew her already, I was so comfortable and just trusted that she's listening. And then the other person was nodding because the story made sense. And they were laughing at their picture. And then I think like at the end I was sharing with them saying this is just one perspective of a portrait of you. And this is just one story about yourself that is prompted by a rather positive prompt. But yet we're still quite self-critical, aren't we? We're still quite self-critical. And it's hard to shake off that perception of ourselves and the fear of being perceived negatively, which affects just why we're here, right? The entire reason why we're here. So I don't think it was like pushing any envelope because it wasn't very, very controversial, but it was really pushing your own assumptions and then pushing your definitions and also pushing your perceptions of one art, your perception of who you are and what you think people see about you. And then I had like the drawer reflect back to, after hearing that story, what they thought about that person and why. It's like, I can tell that you're a really empathetic person because in your story you said this and this and that and that. Like, you're so charming because the way you told your story, this and that. It's like, you're such a kind person. You're so generous. And you're like, you're such a good storyteller. So there was a lot of affirmations from just telling a story where you wouldn't get that when you're usually having a conversation. And then we would switch. And so then the drawer becomes a subject, and the subject becomes a drawer, and then you listen to a different story and another story. I think that was the most sharing everyone did. And it was intimate enough where I would like, stop in and peek in and sit in on some of those conversations where they got really deep. Ladies talked about different stories of grief, of loss, of hard childhoods, breakthroughs, of reclaiming who they are, crushed dreams, but still hope. So there was a lot. There was a lot that was shared.
Are you looking for a way to talk to your child or maybe a student about a recent death that's happened? Or maybe you and your family are facing a pretty difficult diagnosis. Or maybe your community is facing the loss of a very important person. And it's really hard sometimes to know what to say, what to do, and how to have these conversations, especially with young ones. Oftentimes, books can help. Children's book about grief and loss can be a natural way to open up the conversation. That's gentle, age appropriate, and also approachable. Moving in Forever is such a book. It's written by me, Rebecca Wu, from personal experience. It's also written from a child's perspective, and it's a tender story about love, loss, and family. It offers understanding and support for every heart that grieves, no matter the age. In summary, it walks through two nephews who take care of their Aunt Kiri, who's terminally ill. And while there's lots of fun that opens up, and she's the coolest aunt in the world, Kiri is also very sick. In her last days, she wants to be surrounded by love. And that's what the two boys do. They take care of her and remember her in their hearts forever. A note to grown-ups is that children don't process death the same way adults do. So it's important to support their feelings appropriately as you read through the book. We have some resources to help on our webpage, movinginforever.com. You'll see some downloadable resources to help support your journey, and also a host of different workshops and seminars and classes that we have. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see a way to meet the author. You can bring me to your classroom, your libraries, and your community. We'll do story time and an art activity. There's also videos of our podcast interview with Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, a stop-motion animation by Bree Reads, a popular YouTube storyteller, and a bilingual read-aloud that I do in Cantonese and English. And if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the story and pictures of the story behind the story. We hope that this resource helps in your process and in your journey.
Yeah. I think
You seem
I am.
Are you
I am. I think like there were some similar sentiments.
Mm,
Oh, at my conference, and one of the workshops I was able to attend, or breakout sessions, was about writing and publishing. And you're in a room full of pastors or ministers who want to potentially recycle their material into book form and
oh,
that kind of thing. But, so sometimes they're not even creatively writing like maybe my background is in. But we addressed a lot of the revelation of self through the creation process. So it is equally formative for the creator and the writer as it is for the recipient of the message being written, and how you can tell when you're creating when you're not being fully honest with yourself and your voice isn't really fully emerging, because you are in a room potentially of very diligent persons, right, who need to adhere to a moral standard and to a particular role and a particular image, and it's very easy to go back to strictly what you're being taught and the language that you're being taught to use. And so one of the participants was confessing that her editor, who was a male, not Asian, was critiquing her writing and saying, I don't see you in this. I don't really see and perceive your voice. And that's all he could say, because he couldn't really, only she knew clearly what that could be, right? And to be honest, she confessed that she actually didn't know. She's like, how do you bring out your voice? And in the context of being in ministry and then having to write, you might not end up in writing workshops. So I just contributed the little hint, and I was like, writers workshops often are free. They're incredibly vulnerable, but you hopefully have a safe collection of people who can give you feedback, and it helps you see yourself a little better. Not that you can, when I think psychologically, it's not that you always need to rely on others to see you in order for you to see yourself, right? However, they can spot your blind spots. And I gave an example of having given my faith-driven writings to my non-faith persons or different faith people. And because they don't understand the jargon, they don't understand the culture, they don't understand those definitions, they can call out things that feel fishy or feel disingenuous or needs a lot more explanation. And I was like, though, even those things are valuable. And then we went into this entire list of like why people talk themselves out of creating their book or writing their book, or it would be creating their art, because it is a vulnerable process. And then you get through half of it, and they're like, most of you are probably suffering from imposter syndrome. And many times in Asian American circles, there is this collectivistic thinking pattern. And so we are taught in a lot of ways not to stand out and to play a particular role. And so when it comes to AKA personal branding, they might not be like so forthcoming about it.
Right. It seems too show-offy.
Way too show-offy. And so there was just a lot of agreement in the room that one could sense. And I'm glad we went in there and said that, because it is, and there were moments of, I met a new woman that I got to share my hotel room with, and she's a young Vietnamese woman, and I caught her talking to other staff members and saying, oh, she's not charming and blah blah, and just a few minutes later she made these super charming, super cute goodbyes and jokes and in an encouraging way. And then I looked at her and I was like, didn't you just say 10 minutes ago I overheard you say that you weren't that charming? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, you are absolutely the most charming person here. She's like, no, is that really true? And I was like, oh, you don't even know. And she's like, she paused and she was like, I really receive that. And I was like, that's so fascinating that you'd never, to me, this is the most obvious thing. Yeah, as someone who just met her and in the last 24 hours, I was like, nothing you have done was not charming to me and likable and lovable. And I think that it's fascinating that you perceive yourself not as such. So I think having that partner in the exercise that you were talking about to mirror in some ways and reflect back to you who you are because you don't often see yourself correctly, or you know you don't see yourself correctly, and you need someone to be like, hey, that's not true about you. Yeah, I really felt, I mean, ethnic and racial identity comes with a lot of pain and a lot of pride, but a lot of pain. And I could feel it in a room full of very seasoned caretakers who,
Yeah, I bet.
I think that was also fascinating, is like seeing a lot of people like you and me who are social emotionally aware, and they could encourage the other person instantly, and then but to try to offer that encouragement to the other person because they could probably relate, like, oh, you probably don't get the affirmation you often need, especially from your laymen, especially from your congregants, because you have to perform into a certain role. You have to perform into a certain image, pick a particular profile, and maybe remain detached. But then if you are around other people who feel safe enough to call out the gold in you and things like that, like, why not let people who've been there before say it to you, which probably often means even more because it's like, hey, I've been there. I have this experience. This is not flattery. This is meaningful.
Yeah.
You have this gift. Go find it. Go search and dig deeper into it. So it was really fascinating being not just around women in this context, but around men as well, who have their particular struggles, and having to have pioneered through spaces where there might have felt very much only like the only Asian person in that room. Is really also an
Feel like
underlying.
you're a minority.
Yes.
The one.
The one at your university.
Or the one or the few.
Oh, one of a few.
The one or the few. I wanted to, like, when you were saying, like, the importance of having that partner or someone to reflect to you because the way you see yourself is often incorrect. I almost want to I also want to say that the way we look at the way we look at ourselves will always be skewed. So whether it's correct or not, it'll always be skewed with whatever mood we're in, whatever context we're in, whatever just happened before, what we hope to happen later, the clarity we might have, how regulated we are. And then I wonder, though, that if we have more reflectors, right? If we have more mirrors, like when we're driving a car, the bigger the car, the more mirrors you have, the bigger the mirrors, right? The more reflectors we have, whether they're in mirror form or friend form or counselor form, might we start to see like different angles, and I think, and then develop a more holistic picture of ourselves for ourselves. And we start to, oh, I never thought about that. Oh, I never thought that my voice sounded good. Or, really? Because we're so fixated on whatever we're fixated on. Whether we hang our identity on the top 3 traits that people love about us, or the top love about ourselves, or we're hung up on and obsessed about and fixated on the last 3 traits we don't want anyone to like associate us with, but they do, or the 3 things about us that we hate. It's so extreme, you know? It's either we love this about ourselves or we hate this about ourselves, and then we're like fixated on those specific characteristics, when really we're kind of like, you know, we're not static in those necessarily. I think in our personality we have certain markers, but I don't know, like there are different ways of phrasing things that I think help, especially children, and we all were children once as grown women, see that those characteristics and traits aren't good or bad, because they could be good or bad in a specific context, right? You could be very bold, courageous, inquisitive, adventurous, and objectively in a silo, those sound like positive traits. But in a child, in the context of crossing the street, fetching a ball, being courageous, bold, adventurous, and curious might lead you to disaster, right? So I'm just thinking of like these like videos that I see sometimes from other parents and other educators where like instead of calling them stubborn, is it better to use a word like strong-willed or firm or committed or convicted? Like, because the connotation is a little bit more positive, or at least not negative, right? So the word stubborn in society has a negative connotation, but the word convicted might not, right? So how do we help our littles, our children, our teenagers, even ourselves, see that in certain contexts, my stubbornness really serves me? My firmness and almost inflexibility can make me a very principled person. Like, that's a non-negotiable. And I am sure of that. So being that convicted and committed to that value could be seen as stubborn or could be seen something else, right? So I'm just thinking of like these words, and it's not just to like help little kids feel better about their bad behavior, because it's not about that. That's very different from what I'm talking about. Like, oh, he wasn't yelling, he was just very passionate. No, if he was yelling, he was yelling. True that he was very passionate about the subject, but yelling at someone is punitive. Right? Yelling at someone feels harsh. Yelling at someone can hurt another's feelings. So keep the behavior with itself, not call it something different. But yes, passionate is accurate. Yelling is also accurate, right? Because, like, do you remember, like, interviewing for jobs, especially first out of college, and you start prepping your resume, you start prepping for this interview, and you know the question that you're asked is, what's your greatest strengths? And then what's your greatest weaknesses? And the golden answer is your strengths are your weaknesses. Do you ever answer that way? And I'm like thinking about all this as we're talking about the workshop, because it's so true. Like, depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on like your mood, your strength could be your greatest weakness.
Yeah, absolutely.
But do we affirm ourselves in that is who we are, right? I am a committed, convicted person. That can lead me to be quite stubborn in certain situations. And it could also lead me to be quite principled in other situations, right? I can go either way depending on what's happening, right? In a relationship, being strong-willed can be seen as inflexible, cannot compromise with a partner. Other ways, it could be leading us down the path, committed to our values, or sticking with it no matter what. So I think there's always different sides of the same coin, which is not to say those traits that we don't like about ourselves are untrue. They can still be true. They can be a part of our self-portrait. They can be a part of our identity. It's just, I think it's embracing both and all and dispelling the ones that are actually not accurate, that we get too hung up on, that lead to a lot of self-doubt and self-criticism. They can lead to a bunch of, I think, a lot of other things that women suffer from. Yeah. That was a lot.
No, I relate to that too. It was happening this weekend again, where it's like, it, I'll end on this, like, it was reflecting my childhood friend was here.
Mm,
She was able to, you know, when you're a childhood friend and you haven't seen each other in a long time, they have the
yeah,
history, but they have the detachment to observe certain things that people
yeah,
closest to
yeah.
you are missing. Yeah, the
Yeah.
gap, right? And we talked about being hypersensitive versus being discerning.
Mm,
And it's
mm.
like,
What's the
and,
for you guys?
you know, I don't think we got to the bottom of it. I think, you know, as you are going through therapy and healing from things, I can tell when I'm being hypersensitive and I'm overstimulated versus when I just like smell something right away and I just know something, maybe because I've had enough experience to identify the markers, whether I feel it or not, or whether it's a real sincere hunch that I have to pay attention to because my flashers, you know, things are flashing in front of me. So we didn't get to the bottom of that, but she did give me. I've been having people explicitly remind me of things that I took for granted in myself. And,
Mm,
you know, I was saying in my brain, people mistake the fact she could identify that I was going through a lot of grief actually. And then, but at the same
mhm,
time, she's like, she knows that I'm still laughing a lot. And I was like, that often throws people off. Or, and then she's like, you also have like, I can't say a deadpan voice, like face is the how she identified something was off. She's like, it wasn't a bad face. It's like a neutral, incredibly neutral face that I don't see you make often. And then she was
mhm.
saying, though, that, yeah, you might be laughing. I said to myself, maybe I'm laughing because I'm coping with life and I can't help but just laugh at certain things, you know, to like laugh off the energy of negative energy that's in my body. And she's like, but you're also a person of wonder. You always have been a person of wonder. And so you just enjoy things thoroughly.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard her say that
Mm,
about me. And I was like, I appreciate that. Like, I needed to hear those things because I had started turning all those things into a negative light as well with the self-criticism. So like, I'm really glad that I guess for us, these conferences and these workshops, and it seems like even more specifically with women, and it's a particular demographic to be able to walk some of these conversations with, it felt very fruitful for them to begin to see themselves more rightly. So I'm really,
or comprehensively or holistically. I think so. And I was about to say that it might be nice to affirm in each other while we end our conversation today for the
mm,
podcast. In the time that I've known you, you do strike me as a person that's full of wonder. You're you're continually engaging, participating in not just various events, but also various gatherings of people to exchange ideas, to learn, to ask questions, to figure out, or to observe and explore. So I would agree with that childhood friend of yours and say most people wouldn't do that if they don't have this wonder about them and this sense of wonder
mm,
and curiosity and also humility because if you think you already know everything, you wouldn't go out and learn anything
mm,
else. So I think that's very much what I see in you too, and your eagerness to adapt, to step in, to flex, and to help. I think that is, or those are the characteristics I see.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think one thing or a few things that I see about you, I am deeply impressed with how you can turn often ordinary objects or ordinary moments into beautiful and meaningful things. And I think that's what you demonstrate, in Family Art Club, or, taking a rock and utilizing a rock for a self portrait. But I see you doing that often just in life as things happen and that you're rolling with the punches. And what I can't often identify in the moment, I feel like you identify, and you're like, we can make something great out of this. I think for me, it's great that I don't have to see perfect steps and circumstances as contributing to perfect outcomes. And so I
Yeah.
think you embody the message that you're trying to represent. So I think we will end there. I've gotten a knock at the door, which means maybe it's time. I thought noon.
Time to
Yeah,
check
time
out.
to check out. So we will continue.
They're there to clean your room,
Yeah,
Grace.
they're here to shuffle me out. So, well, everyone, we will see each other very soon, and we hope you have a good week. Ciao. Bye.